Welcome back, everybody, to the Wastewater Whiteboard. This was a request from a viewer that we go over nitrification and denitrification. I'm happy to do this. Now, this is going to be a two-part series. Part one, we are going to be talking about biological nutrient removal in terms of nitrogen. There's also phosphorus removal, which we will not get into on this lesson. That is an advanced conversation that we will talk about at a later time. The other way you can do nutrient removal for nitrogen is chemically doing it. The only chemical we're going to talk about here is chlorine, and that's just for context. In the part two version of this whiteboard series, we will talk about the chemical ways that we reduce nitrogen. But that if I went into all the nitty gritty of all the specifics of this, we would be here for an hour. So I don't want to do that to you guys. This episode is going to be focused on what you are going to be asked about the most on your exams. And BNR is a big deal right now. BNR means biological nutrient removal. You might also hear EBNR, enhanced biological nutrient removal. We'll talk about all that at a later time, those definitions and whatnot. But right now, let's just talk about nitrification and denitrification. So why are we going to nitrify? Let's talk about this first, and then we'll talk about this. Nitrification. Why? Well, we have ammonia present in the water. The actual, let me write this on here. The actual thing we measure coming in is called TKN, total kiled nitrogen. You need to know about that. That's the incoming nitrogen coming into the plant. And when we get into the advanced conversation, we'll break down all the different types of nitrogen. But ammonia is fairly prevalent in that. Ammonia is toxic to aquatic life. Very toxic. Ammonia also has a biochemical oxygen demand in the form of nitrogenous BOD. So if you don't deal with this, you still have a BOD load going out into the environment. BOD5 is nitrogenous and carbonaceous BOD. Okay, so ammonia is a huge source of NBOD. Oh, so this is why we nitrify. We want to get rid of ammonia. Now, this is where we're going to touch quickly on chlorine. One way to do it is to oxidize it with chlorine, but that's not very cost effective when there's natural occurring bacteria that'll do it for you. So this is why we use BNR. You don't typically start hitting it with chemicals unless you got to get really low tolerances, but we'll talk tolerances. Really low concentrations. Your permit requires you to get it so low that the bugs just don't do it that much for you. So we'll talk about that at a later time. I'm already getting off track here. So what we do is we convert ammonia to nitrite and then nitrate. So the nitrous amonis and nitrobacter are the two bacteria you need to know about. Those are the names you're going to be asked about. The nitrous amonis converts ammonia to nitrite, and nitrobacter converts nitrite to nitrate, NO2 and NO3. That's important for when we get to denitrification, those compounds having oxygen bound in them. So these type of bacteria are what we call autotrophic. If you want to get pedantic and super technical, they're chemoautotrophic or chemoautotrophic, depending on how you pronounce that. They are autotrophs that use inorganic chemical compounds as their food. Okay, if I just kind of went way over your head, let's briefly talk about heterotrophs and autotrophs. The heterotrophs are like us, humans. We consume organic carbon as our food source. Autotrophs are like plants, like trees and shrubs and stuff. They use inorganic compounds to create their own food. They don't consume their food, they make their food. So photosynthesis is probably the most popular form of this. Plants convert sunlight into food energy using photosynthesis. So that's the biggest difference between heterotrophs and autotrophs. The other thing about heterotrophs and autotrophs that you should know is autotrophs typically take longer, pound for pound, take longer to grow. And we're going to talk about why that's important down here when you need longer MCRTs to pull this off. So now that we kind of have an idea of what autotrophs are, something you should know in an activated sludge basin, the heterotrophs will always outcompete the autotrophs for food, the fight for food. So in order to do this, the carbonaceous BOD, the CBOD, needs to be resolved first. You have to get rid of your carbonaceous BOD. your organic BOD. Okay? And then the autotrophs will be able to do the heterotrophs back off at that point, and the autotrophs can start going after that nitrogenous BOD. These autotrophs, these nitrous ammonius and nitrobacter, are aerobes. They require dissolved oxygen. And you need to run a higher dissolved oxygen than a conventional activated sludge plant. Higher than a 2 milligram per liter. I've seen 2 to 5 milligrams per liter. 5 seems kind of high to me personally as an operator, but BNR plants, I'm sure, run that high, or else that number wouldn't be in the book. Let me know in the comments below. What do you run? How do you run a higher or lower DO than the 2 to 5 threshold? I personally target a 2. It works really good for me. As we start approaching a 3, the blowers start ramping down. And then as we hit 3, the blowers turn off. And I've got one blower on a timer that just stirs up the MLSS to make sure that we're not getting false DO reads, because that does happen. And then as we get closer to 2, the VFDs kick on. We start providing oxygen again. And I'm going to point something out real quick as we move through this. 2 to 5, 7 to 8, 0 to 150, or sorry, 0 to negative 150. These are ranges because there is no one, or sorry, I've never seen 2 plants that operate the exact same way. Plants are engineered based off of your influent characteristics, what you're dealing with. And so just because I run a 2 to 3 milligram per liter doesn't mean that 5 is invalid just because that's my experience. There's a reason we have ranges, I guess, is all I'm trying to say. So the pH range, ideal pH range is 7 to 8. My happy place is about a 7.4. Okay, why is pH important? That is because as you get into lower pH areas, the bacteria start kind of they start becoming inactive, and they start struggling to uptake oxygen. Okay, so what happens at the pH of 6.7 and lower is oxygen uptake starts diminishing. And about at a pH of 6, pretty much all nitrification activity is stopped. Which is, you shouldn't be at a pH of 6 depending on your permit. My permit is a 6.5. I mean, maybe you could be at a 6. It really depends on your permit. But if I'm at a 6, I'm violating my permit at that point. I can't get below a 6.5. That's my permit requirement. Well, why would this even happen? Why do we have to be worried about pH dropping? Well, because one of the many byproducts of this situation is acid. Consumes alkalinity. So when the nitrous ammonius, and I don't know if I mentioned this, their inorganic form of food is ammonia. So they use that, and that's the byproduct of what they do. So an autotroph uses inorganic, and that's ammonia. Sorry if I kind of went back there. I didn't mention that earlier. I should have said that. So they're converting this ammonia. They're using this as food, and one of the byproducts is an acid. And that acid consumes alkalinity. I'm going to do a whole different whiteboard on alkalinity versus pH. I'm not going to get into it now, but I will say that alkalinity is a buffer against pH changes in the downward direction. It stops it from becoming an acid to an extent. Well, if you're watching your pH and you're not watching your alkalinity, I'm going to get into some ops here. Your pH can drop off a cliff very fast, and I'm not saying this as book knowledge. I'm saying this as a person who stood there and watched their pH drop, like not in real time because it's a logarithmic scale, but it'll drop pretty fast, relatively speaking. And so your typical alkalinity target you're going to want when you're nitrifying, I didn't write it here, but it's between 75 and 150. If I find myself getting to 120, I start considering the addition of lime or sodium bicarbonate. Sodium bicarbonate's my chemical of choice for this. I don't have to do this in my current plant, but I have had to do this in the past. And I have shown up to the plant to do my rounds, and the alkalinity was gone. And my pH was a 6.3. Okay? And it's not a fun place to be. Now I'm not just doing sodium bicarbonate, I'm throwing in soda ash too, because that will help the pH quite a bit. And now I'm like, I'm giving the plant medicine when we should have never gotten here, So I'm just talking from experience there. Pay attention to your alkalinity, because if you're getting to a 6.7, you may be ready to fall off a cliff, okay, and start plummeting to those lower pH levels. So yeah, at 6.7, they start struggling with oxygen uptake. So you may have a 4 in your aeration basin, and you're saying, hey, all good, I got my oxygen. Why am I not why am I in nitrite lock? There's only enough activity where we're getting here, but we're not getting here. What's going on? Check your pH. You might not be in the place you think you're at. And this is mostly done in an activated sludge plant. You can do it. I worked on a pond system where we completely nitrified. That was cool. Denitrification is really hard in those other plants. On my current trickling filter, we denitrify, or not denitrify, I'm sorry, we partially nitrify. So you can do it in other processes, but activated sludge is the most common situation you'll find yourself in for this, and you have to run longer MCRTs. You need longer time for these autotrophic bacteria to do their thing and to populate. Okay, a target would be, I've read 8 to 15 days. 8 seems a little light to me still. I would buy 15 days. I would say 15 to 20. There's some extended aeration plants that get to 30 days. It's quite a while. And you might say, well, Shawn, what do you run? What's your MCRT? I couldn't tell you because I don't run those here. The 2 process control things I pay attention to are my MLSS, because I run a membrane bioreactor. I need a thick MLSS. And so by definition, because I have a higher MLSS, my MCRT is going to be higher. We'll talk about that at a later time when we do activated sludge. But the other thing I look at is my food to microorganism ratio. That is more important to me than my MCRT. For BNR, personally, I'm not saying that's a hard and fast rule. If you use MCRT, please don't think I'm dogging on MCRT. I just have found the F to M works the best for me, and I keep that around a 0.1. That's a happy place for me. Okay, so now we've nitrified. That's the explanation of nitrification. It's converting ammonia all to nitrite, nitrite to nitrate. And then these are the considerations. Okay, if you have any questions, please put it in the comments below. Now, before we start talking about denitrification, if you like what you see, if you're getting anything out of this, please subscribe. Please like the video and forward it on to your friends who are studying so that they can help. We can help them get certified as well. Okay, denitrification. Well, we've nitrified, we stabilized the ammonia. What's so bad? Why do we need to go through this? Well, this is a little bit more dubious than you might think, for 2 reasons. One, it's pretty much fertilizer. Nitrogen and phosphorus are limiting nutrients. This is why we're targeting them. And nitrate goes into lakes and it causes something called eutrophication. You need to know that word. What is eutrophication? Go look that up online. Put that word right there, EUTROPHICATION, into your Google search, and eutrophied lake, and you'll see a lake that's completely green because it's filled with algae. It kills lakes. And you might say, hey, algae is good for lakes, oxygen. Well, not when it covers the whole lake and sunlight can't get through. At that point, pretty much catfish is all that's going to live in there. Bad juju. We don't want that. Groundwater contamination is another thing. So groundwater can get these nitrates in them. If you're unfamiliar as to why that's a problem, I'm going to link at the very end of this video. You can click on it. Go check out my video on preventing nitrification in a drinking water tank. As wastewater operators, it's great when we're nitrifying. We're doing great. Drinking water, it's super dangerous. Super dangerous. Go check. I'm not going to get into it right now. Just go check out that video, and you'll hear me talk about why it's so dangerous. So we don't want to be sending nitrates to homeowners that are on wells and don't know to look for this stuff, as well as our drinking water brothers and sisters that are treating the water coming out of wells, and we are the ones responsible for filling the groundwater table with nitrates. We don't want to be doing that. So just because you discharge to a leach field doesn't mean you're out of the woods on nitrate. So what are we doing when we are denitrifying? There's a lot of different ways to do denitrification. Land application is actually one of them, but we're going to focus on a specific and the most common, as far as I'm aware, the most common form of denitrification and what you're probably going to be tested on. The process is these bacteria convert nitrite and nitrate to nitric oxide, nitrous oxide, and nitrogen gas. All 3 of those are gases, and they disperse to the atmosphere, which is air is mostly nitrogen, isn't it? So we're just contributing a little bit more nitrogen to the air, and we're doing everybody a good service by keeping it mostly nitrogen. Kind of a joke. I mean, this is pretty minimal in terms of the grand scheme of things. But yeah, that's what happens. I haven't listed the heterotrophic bacteria here, but you can look them up. There's several different names. The names you're mostly going to be tested on, as far as I'm aware of that. If you've had one of these on your test, please let me know. It'd be good to get that to test takers. Put it in the comments section, please. So these are heterotrophic. These are not autotrophic bacteria that denitrify. They require a carbon source, an organic carbon source. Well, that's a problem because all of our CBOD is gone, right? We're at the end of process here. Well, how in the world do we do this? In the advanced part 2, I will talk about the many ways we do this, but the one I will focus on in this conversation is there is typically what's called an anoxic selector or an anoxic zone somewhere in the plant. And what I have seen the most, I don't know if this is statistically correct, but it is anecdotally correct, is you return your nitrified RAS, return activated sludge, back to the front of the plant where you've got a high BOD concentration, either in an EQ basin or an actual dedicated anoxic selector or an anoxic zone. So I worked at a plant where we returned to the EQ, it worked fine. And I currently work at a plant where we have an anoxic selector and it works great. Okay? And so now you've got carbon, but these heterotrophs need to breathe. So there's no dissolved oxygen in these areas. How do they breathe? Well, these bacteria are facultative anaerobes. What they are going to do is they're going to look for molecular oxygen, bound oxygen, in the form of nitrite and nitrate. Look at that. There's an O2 right there, and there's an O3. Well, they're going to strip the two oxygens, and they're going to use it to breathe. And that's how we get these compounds formed that gas off. Okay? And so you need to engineer this location to not have any dissolved oxygen present. No DO, but it's not anaerobic. Okay? Or else you won't denitrify. I mean, just by definition, if you've got nitrates in there and nitrite, it isn't anaerobic because there's bound oxygen present. So there's 3 places you can have in terms of what we're talking about. You have aerobic, dissolved and free oxygen is present. Anoxic, only molecular oxygen is present. And anaerobic, no oxygen is present. Okay, this is anoxic. Well, how do we measure? Excuse me, sorry about that. How do we measure our anoxic zone if our dissolved oxygen probe or sensor, or whatever you call it, only goes to 0? And then now I don't know what's going on because anoxic is without dissolved oxygen. Enter the oxygen reduction potential sensor. I love these. I've heard a lot of operators complain about them. I like them. They work for me. If you use something different than an ORP, please put it in the comments below. But an ORP reading of 0 millivolts to 0 millivolts to negative 150 millivolts is going to be a safe place for anoxic. I have seen different numbers. I've seen 50 to negative 50. I've seen 100 to negative 100. But I'm going to stick with this one since there's so many different sources that will tell you different numbers. 0 millivolts to negative 150 millivolts. I like to stick around a negative 50 millivolt. That's my target. And if I drift plus or minus 25 millivolts, okay, that's fine. If I start getting close to 0, I start paying attention. And okay, I'll give it to you. I won't wait for the advanced. Too much, I might be running too much dissolved oxygen before the RAS returns. So I might need to back off my DO, or I'm not getting good oxygen uptake because something else is happening that we've already talked about, and I need to start looking there. Or my loadings just aren't as heavy as I think they are, and I need to check my food to microorganism ratio. And then if I start getting to negative 100 millivolts, I start paying attention. I don't worry too much if I'm getting more towards the anaerobic side, but when we hit negative 150 millivolts, under negative 150 millivolts is generally considered anaerobic, okay? When you get there, other things start happening like odor issues, acids, organic acids are released, like, your target is anoxic, not anaerobic. If your anaerobic zones are used for phosphorus removal, biological phosphorus removal. Anoxic zones are used for biological nitrogen removal. And something that happens here, oh, by the way, if I'm getting here, I'm going to look at the same thing I was looking at, except flip it. Are my loadings too heavy? Is my DO too low? And if I'm getting to negative 150, if I'm going anaerobic, I'm going to look at some other process issues. And then this process returns alkalinity to the water. Okay, in a healthy plant such as mine, I'm not being braggy, about my wonderful plant, but it is healthy. And so let me show you how you don't have to fear alkalinity being consumed, because my influent is pretty alkaline. It's got a decent amount of alkalinity in it. It's going into that anoxic zone. My influent is coming into the anoxic zone. My return to that anoxic zone denitrifies, okay, and it releases more alkalinity into the water. Sorry, into the mixed liquor. Some people might not like it that I call it water. It releases more alkalinity into the mixed liquor, and then when it comes time for the nitrification to occur, there is more than enough alkalinity present, because you not only have the influent alkalinity, you've got the released alkalinity. And this return alkalinity is typically 50% of the alkalinity consumed. In our advanced part 2 of this, we'll talk about the pounds of alkalinity per pound of ammonia converted. We'll talk about that. It's actually not that hard to do that. But this is a longer video than normal, and I'm trying to give you guys that kind of the bird's eye view. Conversely, if you're not denitrifying properly, and this is the situation I found myself in at that plant where I was at a 6.3 or whatever it was, I found myself at with zero alkalinity, and my pH was falling off a cliff. I was not denitrifying properly, and I wasn't returning alkalinity. So all the alkalinity coming in from my influent was getting consumed right away, and now I was in a bad spot. So I was doing a lot of chemical adjustment there. So that's biological nitrification and denitrification in a nutshell. All right, those of you who work in BNR plants and are watching this, and those of you who are experiencing this, know that I did not hit every single thing. We will hit more in part 2, but this is a great place to start to truly understand nitrification and denitrification. In the grades 3, California grade 3 and equivalent, you're going to need to know most of this, not all of it, but most of it. What I found on the grade 4, it was very nitrogen removal heavy, my grade 4. I almost felt like is this a nitrification test or is this a wastewater treatment plant operator test? There's so much about this stuff. Those questions were different. They weren't like, do you know the name? What they were doing there was pitching scenarios at you, and you need to figure out the problem. So it was more of a critical thinking test. And when I do take my grade 5, I'm sure it'll be even more fun. So yeah, that's what we got. If you have any questions, please ask. If you have anything to add to this, please ask. There's plenty to add to this. This video could be an hour long if I just kept going, but let's baby steps. And if you want me to do a video on something that could help you on your test, if there's something you are confused about, please let me know in the comments below. And I hope you guys have a great day. Catch you in the next one.